Hey, welcome to Overtime, where we take Sunday's message further. My name is Jeremy, and I'm your host. And this is a podcast where we just want to ask the questions that we think that you would ask as it relates to Sunday's message. And as we do so, we hope that it helps you grow in your life and your faith. With that being said, be sure to hit that subscribe button so you can stay up to date on all of the podcasts that are coming out. Not only that, hit the like button, because when you do so, it helps us help other people. And if you ever have a question about Sunday's content or about Overtime, you can submit those to overtime@npaustin.com, and we will be sure to get to those in future podcasts. So with that being said, here's a quick recap of Sunday, and then we're going to jump into our conversation today.
Like up until about 100 years ago, most of humanity lived in a constant state of discomfort. We all experience a gravitational pull towards what is most comfortable, but not always most beneficial. Our level of comfort is changing. It is no longer proportional to our quality of life. Jesus gives us a whole nother layer to this idea of discomfort, that there's a deeper meaning, a deeper significance within our discomfort. Again, it says, looking at his disciples, he said, "Blessed are you who are poor, for yours is the kingdom of God." Right in the middle of our discomfort, that we are most likely to lean on God and depend on him. What if everything you ultimately want, not surface level desires, but what you long for in your core, in your soul, what if everything you ultimately want is found on the other side of discomfort?
I tell you, I'm like attempting to become a morning worker-outer.
Really?
Yeah.
Okay.
I just like, the more the scheduling stuff, second kid on the way, it's like,
Yeah.
I don't have time to work out once my family's awake.
Yeah.
Like, because anytime I'm working out, it's like I'm missing time with them, or Ashley's got the burden. And so
Yeah.
I leave work at 3, and like I got there at 7, but then
Yeah.
witching hour happens, and I'm like out in the forest running by myself, enjoying life, and she's like suffering by herself,
Yeah.
So I think and I only get one touch point with Grayson every day
Yeah.
if I like leave before he wakes up.
Yeah.
And so if I work out in the morning and then I'm like there
Yeah.
when he wakes up, then
Yeah.
I get to say hi, and then I go to work, and then I come home and there again. So
Wow.
yeah.
Would you say you're getting out of your comfort zone to work out in the morning?
Yes. I hate it. It's terrible.
Yeah. It's so interesting, like what falls naturally to people, because I've just always been the exact opposite. Like, I don't deserve a medal for being a morning working outer. It's just been always natural to me. And when I've tried so many times to do the opposite, to do like a 4 or 5 o'clock, feel like those early morning hours are some good writing time, feel like I can kind of reset mentally before I'm home from whatever was at work. And I just, I want to say I can't. And then there's another voice in me that says, don't say that. But I'm like, I can't do the afternoon. I just become the laziest version of myself. And it feels like just to like even change, to like put on workout clothes feels like this incredibly like
so
heavy
hard.
task that I'm like, I don't have it. So
I'm also an afternoon worker outer, and I worked out yesterday morning.
Yeah.
For the first time in a while, and I'm still tired from it.
That's so. I wonder if is it the sports we played? Like, did you? I don't know.
And Taekwondo was always in the evenings,
Yeah.
afternoon evenings, growing up. So that was every night for me for a decade.
I'll tell you, for me, part of what it was, when I was on the swim team, we would do 2 workouts a day. So we would 3 times a week. So 3 times a week we would work out at 5 in the morning and at 5 in the afternoon.
Yeah.
And I hated getting up that early.
Yeah.
And having to do that, and then also knowing that I would have to go back to the pool in the afternoon. It was just also, I think, like in the wintertime specifically, being super cold and then waking up and having to go get in the cold pool. It was terrible.
I wonder what David Goggins would say to all of us right now.
I know what he was saying. Can't say it
We'd
on
have
here.
to censor a lot of that out of the podcast.
That would be a fun podcast at some point. Like, what do you think about Goggins? You know what I mean? Like, that's an interest, because I feel like there's some mixed reviews. Like, it's, some people love him. Some people are like, oh, he's doing some damage. You don't know.
Yeah.
Yep.
I just find him really interesting.
Mm-hmm.
Like, when I listen to him, I just think he's interesting.
Oh, that would be hard to make an accusation that he's not.
Like, right, wrong, or indifferent though. He's just like he's a character.
Yeah.
Did you see? Sorry, this is. Josh can cut this out if he needs to. Did you see the video or the animated video of like Elon Musk landing on Mars, And then Joe Rogan was with him in the ship, and they got on the ship. And then David Goggins was like already there because he'd ran all the way from Earth. And he's like, I'm on my way to Jupiter. I got to show you that. No. That's another one of those videos that just can't share on the podcast. It'd be censored for sure.
Yeah.
So
no, I have not. But we are have kicked off a series all about comfort.
Yes.
And so you kicked it off. So I get to interview you. You get to speak more today.
Oh, gosh.
Which is really fun.
Yeah,
so
it's fun for you.
I look forward to that.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think one of the pieces that didn't make it in to your message, but was your observations on Free Solo, which is maybe one of the more uncomfortable movies too. You said the most uncomfortable, I think.
Yeah, well, I mean, the entire concept of the movie, like it's like this circular thing because they're filming, for people who don't know, this guy named Alex Honnold. He did a free solo climb, which is a climb without a rope, up El Cap. And Josh, what is the elevation of El Cap, top to bottom?
It's like 30. It's like a 3,000-foot wall.
Yeah. So 3,000-foot wall. So you're talking more than half a mile vertical.
Yeah.
And he did it without a rope. And just like, he did it in like 2 hours, just straight up. And people will do this with ropes, and they'll like camp on the side of the wall for days, or, they'll make their way up there.
It was just under 4 hours. 4 hours was a big, record barrier.
Oh, okay. I thought it was faster than that. That's okay. But anyways,
4 hours.
What's the guy to even do it?
Yeah.
Come on.
Did it count? Yeah. If you didn't get it on his Apple Watch, it didn't happen.
Yeah.
But yeah, so that's the movie. So them filming him doing this, but the whole paradox of the movie, like, it became just as much about him as it did about the people who were filming him.
Yeah.
Because they were filming their friend do this, and they're like, am I about to just watch, like, one of the quotes was, am I about to watch my friend like fall through the frame to his death?
Yeah. Am I gonna like literally catch it on camera?
Yeah. Yeah, and I'm just standing here watching my friend die.
Yeah.
And so it became like they're like filming the filmmakers as they're doing this movie. So it's just really interesting. But I went and saw it. It was one of those, you and I can relate on this. We like in seasons of our life when it was more of reality to go see movies like by ourselves early in the morning when nobody else is there. Yeah. So this was one of those movies that I went and saw it by myself, and nobody else was in the theater. It was fantastic. It was like a Tuesday morning. Yep. This was when I was in school though. Yeah. And I was just very, very uncomfortable the entire time. Yeah. I knew he lived. Yeah. But still it's just like wild to watch. Yeah.
Well, I am without child, so I can still see movies by myself.
Oh, yeah, that's right.
So I'm still in that season. You have left me. You have moved on. But I have not joined you in the new horizon yet.
So. Yeah, now all of our movie conversations are like, why are they so long? Like, we have to travel there and get a sitter for like 4 hours. Yeah. We don't want to see previews. We don't need the previews.
Yeah, that actually is funny. Like, I used to live for previews, and now it's like, these are all on YouTube. Like, you don't need this anymore. Yep. But he's got a great quote. He said, "My comfort zone is like a bubble around me, and I've pushed it in different directions and made it bigger and bigger until these objectives that seem totally crazy eventually fall within the realm of the possible." Yeah. And I feel like, I was just chatting to you before this started. Like, one of the things, and if you have any commentary, you can add to it. But like, one of the things that I was listening Sunday is, you laid it out in such a clear way. I was like, why don't we all just do that? Like, why don't we do the uncomfortable short-term thing for the long-term reward that we all want? Like, I don't even know how many people, this didn't feel like a message where a lot of the crowd would sit there and then an internal lawyer would be battling with you. It felt like it was like, yeah, that makes sense. And yet a lot of us are not going to then go do the uncomfortable thing. And I was just like curious about that as I was watching you. Yeah. And, but even in that quote there, at least part of the answer to me does feel like there's a capacity thing that goes on with discomfort, that the more uncomfortable you are, the longer there's a capacity that grows. So I use like an ultra marathon example. It's like, you could have all the right intentions. You could like desire it in your heart, like your head and heart could be connected. It's like, I need to go do that. But if you haven't run in 5 years, like, you're not doing an ultra tomorrow. Like, there's there's a capacity that grows, as you step out of this. And I would imagine that analogy goes to a lot of areas, like our emotional health, our relational, like whatever it is that we desire to go do is not accessible to us tomorrow. Yeah. And, that can be part of what makes it impossible, but also maybe the barrier right there. Yeah. Like, I ran the Cap 10K this weekend, and one of our friends and the Waldens that are, you know, much faster than most humans, you know, we're kind of talking about that because they ran really fast. And
I passed them on Lady Bird Lake like a couple weeks ago.
you passed them?
Yeah.
Were they going in the opposite direction?
I think Adam and I made. No, we were going opposite direction.
Okay. When you said you passed them, I was like, you were zooming.
No. Yeah. No, I was being chased by a murderer, and that's the only reason I would ever run that fast. No, I think Adam and I made eye contact, but
very quickly.
Yeah. But they're just going so fast. They're like gazelles.
Oh yeah,
and I feel like a hippopotamus, like trotting along when I see people like that running.
Yeah, and their elite running mindset too. They're when they see somebody, they just keep going. They're like, I see too many people, I can't stop.
That's probably what happened.
It's just very focused, like Kobe Bryant-esque. Yeah. It's pretty wild. Anyways, but talking to them, they're like this interesting, like running stays uncomfortable for people because you're on like that threshold of whatever is next for you.
Yeah.
So even though it's really fast, now you're just running faster, and it's still on. It's not like the comfort goes away when you get in shape. You're just on the new edge of my next kind of, you know. So it's just like getting used to this comfort.
Yep.
But you talked about, like, you did a great job summarizing, and that the book Danger in the Comfort Zone is that, wait, no, that's a different.
No, Comfort Crisis.
Comfort Crisis. Okay, yeah. Comfort Crisis is the one that, like, there's the whole beginning is like laying out these, you know, a whole framework for how much our world has changed in a really short period of time when you think about all of human history, which it's to me incredibly compelling to think about. I know that, like, for some people it's like, yeah, but that's what we have, so that's my world. But it's like, okay, but like 99.9% of our ancestors like didn't have this.
Yeah, it's crazy.
We're learning from like all of human wisdom and meaning and purpose and value and what makes us tick, and we're like living in a totally different bubble.
Yeah.
You know, and even on this planet today, it's not just like a historical thing. It's also the part of the world that we happen to live in. This is incredibly relevant.
Yeah.
And I found it fascinating then to be the way that you unpacked all of the ways in which you could argue we're like digressing. It's like, wait, we're getting more unhappier. We're dying faster. Like what in the world? It's totally counterintuitive.
And also on that note too, I feel like we don't know what we don't know.
Yeah.
Like such a short amount of time in history, like we don't know how all of these things are ultimately in the long term going to affect us. Like, what is the effect of social media 100 years from now?
Yeah.
Like, we can feel right now like there are negative ramifications of it if it's left unchecked in our life. But, you know, I think about when the very fact that there's a screen time app in settings now.
Yeah.
Shows that, like, you know, when it came out, like, you're going to get all the notifications all the time. It's going to be amazing. You're never going to miss anything going on in the world. It's going to be awesome.
Yeah.
And then it's like, oops.
Yeah.
We need to put a little, like, boundary within the phone to,
right.
like, because maybe that's not the best thing. Or, like, when I think of Silicon Valley execs that their kids aren't allowed to have smartphones and stuff, like, things like that. It's like, it's interesting how much we don't realize we don't know.
Yeah.
But then these technological advances just keep going, and it's like, man, what are going to be the ramifications of this long term?
Yeah. I've thought about this before. I don't know why the things I think about sometimes, but if you and I live to be old, I feel like it won't even be as shocking that we lived through COVID or that we lived during 9/11, or I think it'll be like, oh, you were alive in 2007. Like, you were alive with the introduction of the smartphone and social media.
Yeah, what is it, June 24th or something?
Yeah, it's like, you know what I mean? Like, it's like that is what is set into this domino,
Yeah.
I don't know. I don't, it's just interesting how we'll remember that year, but that's just one example of all the things you listed.
Sure.
I was sitting thinking about, like, man, how many people fight about like a 2-degree difference on a thermostat? Like, that's nobody in human history has ever done that till us. It's 68, now 70. It's like, it's unbelievable.
Yeah. And that's one of the things Michael Easter talked about in his book too. I mean, the first like 10 minutes of the message were all, because he has so much to go off of. He just studied all of comfort. It's so interesting to listen to. But he said that today's comforts are just tomorrow's discomfort. So he talks about, like, even though we're comfortable in a certain scenario now, like, 71 degrees is great. We're going to find something wrong with it at some point, and that means we're uncomfortable. We got to figure out a way to get back to a state of comfort, or with food, or with, television. It's like, it's like businesses finding pain points. That's like capitalism. That's not a bad thing, but we're always finding pain points to make things more efficient, more comfortable, all that. And it's like, we're comfortable now, but there are still discomforts that we can find to make more comfortable. And so today's comforts are always tomorrow's discomforts.
Yes.
So it's just interesting to think about,
Yes. No, that's such a fascinating point. So talk to me for a second about this, like the connection between change and pain? Like, why is it that if we're going to make a change in any area of our life, it almost is like a requirement that it's built into the definition that it is going to be uncomfortable? Why do you think the two are linked?
Yeah, I think in any, like in the simplest terms, like changing is changing your current reality, and we are creatures of habit. We like our brains literally form neural pathways that lead to habits that we have in our life that are sometimes healthy or not healthy. And I think that like when you change something, you're literally painfully like telling your brain to think differently, do something differently. And so it's just difficult for us to do because we're creatures of habit. And so we fall into these comforts, and we have a natural propensity to go towards comfort. And I heard it from Carey Nieuwhof, and I just thought he says this really well, but he said that change only happens when the pain associated with status quo becomes greater than the pain associated with the change itself. So the very simplest example of this is like health. So you think about someone who's been really unhealthy for a long time, and you know they can deal with it. They can manage the mobility issues. They can manage not feeling their best every day, but they've been fine up until the point, you know, they get to a point. The status quo has been fine until they get to a point in which they go to the doctor, and the doctor says, hey, if you don't do X, Y, Z, if you don't make a change, you're not going to live to see your grandkids. You know, that now means that the pain of the status quo, maintaining it, has become greater than the pain of change. Before that, they didn't really have like a strong reason to change other than these smaller reasons. Now they have a really strong, like the pain, maintaining the status quo is not going to go good. And so now you're willing to make a change.
Wow.
You know?
Yeah, that makes so much sense.
I think the same thing happens in finances. You know, when financial situations blow up, right? Like, oh, now we got to figure out how to get back to normal. With relationships too, I think there's a lot of like stuff in our hearts and our minds that leads to relationships and things in our life that go kind of have this death by 1,000 cuts. And we're never, you know, it's a status quo, like, oh, that was one bad experience, but that doesn't mean, but then all of a sudden, like, you know, there's a big blow up, and now you haven't talked in years or something like that. And it's like, okay, now there needs to be something different. I need to figure out what's going on in here, because if I don't, I'm going to lose the things that are most important to me in my life. You know? Yep.
Yeah. Well, and even the way you started that, it's like the brain analogy applies to like a lot of relationships, you know, or a lot of, you know, just areas of life that you'd make the change into, which I think is interesting. I think it's a power of habit where he talks about like even the reason that we form habits is to conserve energy. Like your brain is always trying to find new ways to conserve energy, which sometimes is helpful. Like, you know, I always think about like the driving example he uses in that book. If we had to exert the same amount of energy every time we drove as we did when we were, you know, 15 learning how to drive, you know, and you're like terrified to pull out on a road that's like 40 miles an hour, you know, like that would be exhausting. And so our brain is looking, you know, and now today you can like exit on accident. That's crazy, you know, on autopilot, because your brain is so conserving the energy. And so it takes more energy to do anything new or different. And that, you know, goes into the examples that, you know, you just listed, whether it is health or it is relationships. You know, we build these ways that are low maintenance energy to maintain in them until the pain becomes like more of an energy sap than the other way around. It's like all connected, right?
Yeah. I think the challenge there for anybody listening, and for us two sitting here too, is, you know, how can you make the pain of the status quo like more of a reality, so you're willing to make a change now versus waiting till that's going to come down the road and be like far more painful. It's like, that's why, like, you know, little things like the exercise with what is it? 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, where he talks about like writing out your eulogy. Like that is a, like, I am talking about the pains of the status quo if I don't make a change. You know, so those kind of things I think are helpful, because you're allowing yourself to feel that pain before you actually have to feel it.
Totally.
So that's going to lead you to making a change.
Totally. It makes me think of that Samuel Chan, like it's a leadership book, but you know, that growth equals change and change equals pain. Therefore growth equals pain.
Yeah.
And I've always been a little curious about like the change one in there, you know what I mean? Why he didn't just do like growth equals pain, you know, it's like, it's the change is the one that apparently is intuitive. Like, oh, change is painful. Like, you know, that's the one that you're like, I get it. So it's wild. And then you introduced a really interesting phrase, post-traumatic wisdom. It was one of those kind of like quicker points building on a slide, but I know you had some more like context around it, exactly like what it is and some of the ways that even how you heal from some of those kind of experiences. So what if you unpack that a little bit more? Yeah,
well, first I would just like to say that I feel like I know like a percentage of what this is. Like this is like a new idea for me, and I just think it's really fascinating. And so much of anything that I learn and know, I mean, comes from reading books and stuff like that. And this is one of those things. I came across a book we read. We've talked about it on the podcast before. It's called What Happened to You. Mm-hmm. It's by a researcher. I can't remember his name. Mm-hmm. He does the bulk of the book, and then it's Oprah, and Oprah's like interviewing him as he talks about trauma in the brain, pretty much. Yeah. And so it's a really interesting book. It's a good listen. But one of the things they mention is they have this phrase called post-traumatic wisdom to describe this happiness and joy in life that people experience on the other side of working through something traumatic. Mm-hmm. It's really important to point out that it's not going through something traumatic that leads to post-traumatic wisdom, because we've all gone through traumatic things. That doesn't necessarily mean we're smarter and wiser and happier for it. It's working through it, going, what happened in me as a result of what happened. What are the things that it like changed the way I view the world and how I approach relationships, and do I need to undo any of the lies that are not true and replace them with truths? Like, that's the work of going through trauma. And there's a whole lot more in that. I mean, Emily's a counselor. I mean, you guys can go into depth on what that looks like. Sure. But post-traumatic wisdom is coming out of that and looking back on your life and going like, I see things differently. I have a wisdom, I have a happiness, I have a joy. And that's what I shared on Sunday, is like, I can look back on my life and I can say, I wouldn't wish that on anybody, but it's the very thing that like made such a difference in who I am today, And I think some of the stuff I have read in the book that I couldn't go into on Sunday, I just think is really interesting as I think about church and then some of my own personal experiences. So they studied clan, like tribal mentalities, and like what was naturally ingrained in the culture of tribes, prior to 100 years ago. And they found 4 things that were pretty common that they've all discovered are actually things that help people heal trauma and get to a place of post-traumatic wisdom. So those 4 things are connection to clan and the natural world. So there's a relationship component. Regulating rhythm through dance, rhythm, and song, which is not something, especially in like Western culture, we're like, woo, dance, rhythm, and song. Yeah. Some of us are. I'm definitely not. Sure. But just interesting one. The third one was a set of beliefs and stories that give meaning and purpose to trauma. And then the 4th one, which is one I just know nothing about, natural hallucinogens given on occasion overseen by an elder. So that one I'm not educated to talk about. Yeah. But these first 3 I found really interesting because I've experienced these firsthand in people that have gone through traumatic things and they have a joy that you can't explain. And then I've also experienced them in church and seen how the church brings value to post-traumatic wisdom, because connection to clan and the natural world, like that's community, and it's communities doing things together, living life together. Like that happens in church. It's why we hear from people, even atheists, who will say like, man, where can I find this outside of the church? Yeah. You know what I mean? Like the church offers this unique thing that's not natural to our culture anymore. Regulating rhythm through dance, rhythm, and song. This is why I love music on Sundays, is because there's this like kind of universal language that it's not words, it's something audible, it's sound, it's rhythm, it's all of this. And even when we're all just standing there, we're trying to figure out what's going on and what do those words mean and stuff, there's something happening in us that is like healing, that can be healing for us. It's why people like, coming on Sundays, and I'll hear stories of people who never been before. They're totally out on church. And they're like, I don't know why, I was just crying during that whole song. And it's just like, man, it hit something in them that normally doesn't get hit outside of like, dance, rhythm, and song kind of stuff. So, and the third one, a set of beliefs and stories that give meaning and purpose to trauma. I mean, that is the gospel. Right. That's what we talk about all the time. It's Jesus said, in this world you have trouble, but take heart. I've overcome the world. Yeah. And that's a belief. That's a story that, we all put our hope and trust in. And so I just find it really interesting that 3 components, again, the 4th I can't speak to very confidently here. 3 components of healing post-traumatic wisdom are found within the church. Yes. And I just think that's really cool, because I think that's a lot of why we see the stories that we do. People like healing broken things in their lives, Jesus healing, it's the body of Christ. And then I think my own personal experience, and you can speak to this as well, was going and traveling to Juja, Kenya when we were teenagers. Yeah. And it's our Mosaic ministry here at Northpoint, which we talk about every now and then. And one of the things that I remember, like the first couple of days we were there, how old were we? We were 15, 16?
Yeah, going into senior year.
Okay.
Is that right?
So we
16, or was it going
17?
into college? Yeah, one of those, 17, 18 years old.
I know we went going into college. I feel like we went one time before that, though.
Sounds right.
Yeah. But the biggest takeaway a lot of people always have is, why are they so happy? Yeah. Like, we're so comfortable over here, and then we go, and it's become a cliche, but the kids like that were there, they just have smiles on their face. Yeah. And like they have scars on their heads from burns, from trauma they've experienced from people who should love them. Yeah. And they've abandoned them. and they get up in lines to like get their 2 pieces of bread. That's like their lunch for the day.
Yeah.
And this is from the orphanage, but then they're smiling. And then like every time we go, you see just these kids dancing, and then you see these Mzungus, the white people in Swahili.
Yep.
You see them dancing with them really awkwardly, but it's like they're just it's a regular part of their culture. And then they have beliefs and stories. I mean, I don't think I've ever met a more hopeful people and a more faithful group of people.
Right.
Who talk about Jesus in such a genuine and tangible way.
Yep.
And so for me, when I was reading this stuff and what happened to you, I just thought back to going to Kenya, going like, oh my gosh, like if discomfort leads to happiness, the happiest people I've ever met are probably Kenyans.
Yep.
I don't think I've ever met people happier than them. They have these healing things, even though they've gone through such uncomfortable moments and seasons of their life.
Right.
You know, so for me, those dots connected in such a way that was like, wow, this post-traumatic wisdom thing is really powerful.
Yeah. And I think it's important to like, clarify too, because this is not what you're saying, but it's not like, oh, it could be worse or something. Look at these people who have gone through these horrible things. And so therefore our, personal struggles or traumas are less significant. What it means is here's a beautiful example that it's possible. And what we're talking about is true, that there is this, like, it's like the closest we get to like time traveling, really. Like when you're in like the suburbs, when you're in the outskirts of a major city in a third world country, like once you get outside of the city of Nairobi, right? Like now you are truly like, okay, this is how human history lived. Like this is how they existed. Yeah. And in that place, you're talking about the degrees of traumas, the regularity of that, the discomfort that they live in. We've had conversations leading in it, like, we've never had to worry about where a meal comes from or a roof over our head type thing. There are some people in this country that have, it's not common. But in third world countries, it's all the time. You know what I mean? I'll never forget, like David, my friend David, he's actually only a couple years younger than us, which is, he's early 20s, mid 20s. But the first time he told me, like, it's just regularly that they go days without food. And he like didn't flinch at that. He didn't feel like he was telling us that. He was just like, oh yeah, that's how it is here. Like you can find a meal, you can't find a meal. Like that's just how it is. And you're just, it's an eye opening to what you're speaking. The power of this series, like is true. So I'm curious. So this is kind of moving away from part one, so not like a specific question about part one, but kind of an above and beyond, if you will.
Sure.
Both of us have a little bit of a storytelling kind of background. It's like what we do, and I think about even school for us, like you learned how to tell and create, capture stories visually through media and film. That's what marketing is. My background is telling stories of companies and their businesses and so on. And now what we do here, like we get up, we tell stories, literally speaking on Sundays, you still through film and so on. And one of the core elements, like if a movie falls flat, if a book falls flat, like if you get bored, you don't want to listen, is nobody was uncomfortable. Like that there was no conflict, there was no like barrier, obstacle to be overcome. And so I'm just curious, like more the creative in you and so on, like what's the connection to that? Why do you think it's like, turn off the TV, close the book, if this discomfort, this struggle isn't there? What's the connection to this series?
I don't know, man. That's an interesting one. I mean, obviously I think back to school and studying like narrative structure in like, filmmaking and things like that. And we just always talked about like people care when the stakes are high enough to care. And the stakes get high enough to care when there's conflict, when there's discomfort. And so when you're watching a movie or reading a book or some sort of story and, there's stakes that get set in the beginning, that's a conflict that like the character now has to figure out, you're interested, you want to know. And I just think I think we're drawn to these because we see these people in us and maybe in a way. Like I think we all are drawn to, it's that feeling you get when you accomplish something big that you didn't think you could do or that was really hard. Or, I think about going on runs lately, like, when you set a PR or something like that, it's like there's this like heroic moment of like, I did it, I accomplished that thing. And we're just drawn to all, like, those are the moments of life that are just really beautiful. And I just think we're drawn to that. And that's why we're drawn to conflict in storytelling. There's, the worst movies are those that like don't have conflict or don't have good enough conflict to keep you interested. Because everybody's too comfortable. And I just think, I don't know. that's why I said like, the happy hormones, post-traumatic wisdom, you look at relationship studies, you look at like the way stories are told, like we are like running from discomfort, like crazy, but it's the very thing we are drawn to like more than other, you know?
Yeah.
So I don't know. I just think it's interesting when seeing it and even as we talk about Sunday mornings, like we always talk about like, what's the tension today?
Yeah.
You know, as we talk about a message is like, what's the tension we're trying to create?
Yes.
Because we want people to be able to connect with it, relate with it, see how Jesus speaks into the tension that's a felt need that we all experience in our life.
Yeah.
But without the tension,
Yeah.
nobody cares.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know, and Jesus did a great job with that all the time too.
Yes, absolutely. Well, I think there's a connection to what you just said to, you know, our personal, like, I mean, it's just like your own story becomes worth telling when there is like conflict, struggle you've overcome.
Yeah.
Those are usually the ones we share with people. Those are usually ones that we get asked about, people check up on, they care about, you know, as they hear of a struggle or a conflict and how are you? And is it over? Or are you through it? Or can I help? Or, you know, it's like what draws and creates that connection and that meaning and purpose to our lives, which I think is significant because we were struggling even in message prep, like not wanting to communicate. God's just like out there testing us. And so we just got to pass the tests. And it's like this legalistic, like, no, it's these good desires he has for us because he loves us. And that meaning and purpose is found on the other side of this discomfort, you know, these struggles that we're talking about. Yeah.
And it's the place that like, that trusting God happens.
Mm-hmm.
So I just think if we are designed to be in relationship with our Heavenly Father and he gives us everything we need, like we don't need him anymore, then of course we're like, the relationship is going to be dry. But if he wants relationship with us most, he's going to put us in positions in which we have to trust him. Those are uncomfortable scenarios.
Definitely.
You know, so I think that's a really key part of it too.
Well, I don't want to steal from part 3 too much, but just kind of like a closing thought, if you have any, is we're also struggling with saying like we don't want to demonize comfort in this series. Like comfort is all bad or anything comfortable is to be avoided or, you know, shunned. So do you have any like thoughts on the difference between, if we could phrase it as like good comfort or bad comfort? Like what's the ideal here, you know, in terms of like what are we trying to communicate about when we should be comforted, or what do you think?
Yeah, I see Siri as, I think Siri heard you say series.
She's trying to join in.
She's about to join the conversation. She's always listening.
Yeah.
That's super tough because there's a category of people, and there's probably different categories in our lives in which areas in which we need to get uncomfortable, that we're too comfortable now and we're not growing. And then there's areas in which we've just become uncomfortable because of the way our stories have unfolded and what that person did to us, what happened, the layoff, the relationship that broke, you know, just all those things. And so it's hard. Yeah, we can't demonize discomfort because discomfort happens to all of us, whether we will it on ourselves or not. And so, and I think that's, again, where like within it's what Jesus spoke to you, like, blessed are you who are poor in spirit, blessed are you who are uncomfortable, for you will see God. You know what I mean? And that's I think what the goal of part 1 was, to challenge all of us to get a little more uncomfortable and to recognize that God is in our discomfort. And I think that's where we want to go later on in the series is, okay, now that we have these discomforts in our lives, like where does God meet us in those? Yeah. And I just think like he is like, there are multiple Psalms and there's, you know, you even talking about the Holy Spirit, like God is a God of comfort, you know, and it is the discomforts that bring us to him. So he can be our comforter and not something else or some coping mechanism or something like that. And so, you know, it's hard to kind of, black and white, what's good comfort and bad comfort and that kind of stuff. Yeah. But, I think intuitively, we all kind of know, you know, what draws us to God or draws us away from him. Yep. I don't know. What would you say on that?
Well, yeah, as you're giving a couple of those at the end there, it's like there's even seems like there's good comforts. There seems like there's some comforts that are probably bad under any circumstance or scenario. And then there's good ones that become bad ones in excess. You know what I mean? It's like that started as a fine one. And now it's like taking that place of God or whatever it might be. And now I'm defaulting it and overusing it. We've all had too much sugar, like eating too much dessert, as a really simple example, right? But you can take almost kind of anything in that category and it becomes, you know, a bad. I also am like thinking about, in order to be comforted, if God is the comforter, you have to have done something uncomfortable, right? Yeah. Like you have to experience something that is uncomfortable. So it's like, like go do that and then be comforted, but don't like seek comfort when you're not like uncomfortable, you know? So,
and I think the things that are discomforts for some people might be comforts for some people, or comforts for some people might be discomforts for some people. I talked about my living room couch and the corner of the couch, and like the very thing I did after church. It was my mom's birthday, so we celebrated her birthday and everything. But that very night, I was just like right in that spot. I was so tired from Sunday.
Right.
And but it wasn't for me. There have been moments where I stay in that spot way too long.
Yeah.
And like, I'm not present with my family or just something dumb like that.
Yeah.
And, but that was one of those moments where I was like, no, Sunday is, I mean, you know this, like those things are very uncomfortable to pull together and to, you know, talk through on stage and public speaking and all that stuff. And so, just being so tired, it was like, I went there for comfort, and it wasn't necessarily a bad thing, but it was like, oh, I'm trying to rest, I'm trying to recharge,
right?
And so I can be like better the next day. And so
right,
you know, but sometimes that very thing is also the thing that's like not beneficial to my life.
Yeah.
And so it is a little tough. It sometimes changes. Or I think sometimes I watch movies or TV shows because I'm so interested in the story and the characters and all of that, and then sometimes I watch movies and TV shows just to numb out.
And
so sometimes it's just like a good thing, sometimes it's not. It's just hard.
Yeah, you know, it's just, if I was to go back to even what you said at the beginning, it's almost like you talked at the beginning about like having a why, like that bigger picture. You know, you referenced the eulogy example, and that dissatisfaction with like the gap in between means like I need to make a change. But ultimately, like discomfort itself isn't the North Star. It's not like I'm comfortable, so I have to go find a way to be uncomfortable. It's like, no, what I most want, discomfort is probably standing in the way.
Yeah.
And that probably is helpful because I think there's moments where like the good thing actually is comfortable for that season, you know?
Yeah.
I think I've told you, like working out for the last month for me has been a discipline. Like it's been brutal. Like post marathon a month ago, it's just been hard. I've like burnt out. I hit my goal. I don't want to go work out. But leading up to it, I was trying to find all the time I could. Like I was excited. There was natural momentum. It wasn't difficult for me to like go like find that time, you know? And so I think there's a lot of areas. If time with God for you right now is like, you just happen to wake up to your alarm pretty good and you're excited to spend time with God, like doesn't mean you need to do it hanging upside down because it needs to be uncomfortable. Yeah. Like that's a great season because the end goal is like time with him. But if you're like, you know, you're mailing it in, you know, it's like, I'm not growing with him. I'm not like really seeking him. Like, man, a great time to maybe change something up to create some discomfort. So
yeah. And I think, you know, it's you're already in like a place of discomfort because you're not satisfied with where you are with God.
Right.
And so let me get a little more uncomfortable and change things up and stuff like that. Yep. I mean, that can be really relevant to a lot of things. I think about all the way down to like a porn habit. Mm-hmm. You know, it's obviously like uncomfortable if one is feeling like addicted to that. Mm-hmm. But it's also uncomfortable to try to figure that out.
Right.
But you're trying to get back to a place of comfort. But I think for a lot of those kind of things, like there's something that needs to be healed.
Yeah.
And that's the thing we avoid most. And that's the uncomfortable thing. Mm-hmm. Like we seek places of comfort where we don't have to deal with that thing in us that needs to be healed.
Yep.
And that's the gap between the head and the heart. You can say, get uncomfortable all day and you're like, yeah. And it's like, oh, but I don't know how to do that. And it's like, oh, you need to heal something. Something needs to be healed. God needs to do a work in your heart.
Yeah.
And that happens, you know, some of the post-traumatic wisdom places, set of beliefs, community, you know, rhythms of song and dance. I'm not saying go like run down your street dancing or something, but like find places that make you come alive, things that make you come alive, create something, like do these things that studies have saying like help you heal those things in you and bring those things to God.
Yeah. I love that as like a closing, you know, example. Cause I do think for some people it's like the uncomfortable thing isn't going to go do more, fill your schedule with more, work harder. You know, it's actually like to stop, like, you know, it's to stop and be healed or to be vulnerable or, you know, it's like, if you're putting in so many miles, you're getting stress fractures in your feet. Apparently pushing yourself physically isn't the thing. It's like, what are you running from that is actually behind that, you know?
It's when
that's the uncomfortable thing.
It's when people say, I'm not a very emotional person. It's like, you're a human being. Yeah. Emotions are neither good or bad. They're just an indicator of what's going on in you. Mm-hmm. It's up to you on whether or not you want to discern what those things are doing and saying and how they're affecting your life. Yeah. And for some people who say, I'm not an emotional person, no, emotions just probably make you really uncomfortable. Mm-hmm. Why is that?
Yeah.
You know, and what maybe needs to be healed in that so you can be more emotionally alive as a man for your wife or for your kids, whatever it might be. Mm-hmm. Or like relationships, people say I'm not a relational person. Yeah. Like, no, we're built. We are built for relationships. Yeah. You know, relationships make you uncomfortable. Yeah. You have trust problems. Why is that? Right. What happened? What does God need to heal to get you to a place of comfort in relationships because they make you so uncomfortable? Yeah. You know? Well, I'm just going to put kind of all the things I don't want to do in that. I'm not a vegetables person. This wasn't made for him. God just needs to heal something, Jordan. Yeah. Cool. Well, it was a great start to the series, man. You did fantastic. I've already been hearing really good things about it. So I'm excited for these next couple of weeks. I think it'll lead to some really cool conversations, some cool steps. You know, that's what we're hoping for, praying for. So I think it's going to be great. We're continuing part 2 this Sunday. Yep.
So
you're up for part 2?
Hopefully. Otherwise, you're going to get uncomfortable and prep last minute.
And I did allude to part 2 because we're talking about getting uncomfortable specific to faith.
Yep.
Because that is an area in which we don't want to be uncomfortable, but it's really important that we are.
Yes.
So I think you're going to say great things.
Man, I really hope so.
With all that being said, 9:30, 11 in person, live on or on demand later on, and we'll see you guys Sunday.